Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Traffer, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Hello, sir. How are we today?
Good morning, Liam.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are things on your end?
They are really good, really good. Doing a lot of really interesting work at the minute with a lot of really amazing people, and solving some big problems for them for delivering their trials and also like operating their businesses. So yeah, life is good. We like a meaty challenge.
Yeah. It's an interesting time of year. For us, it's really busy on one hand, and on the other side, you can tell things are starting to slow down a little bit as we approach the holidays. So it's also a time to get caught up on processes and getting things really, really focused and prepared for the onslaught we're going to receive in the new year.
Yeah, it's like everyone just expects it, don't it? It's like I always find it a really good time of year to like reflect, and try and like really try and understand and sort of dig down and look at whether it's business goals or personal goals and say, okay, what can I do? What do I want to do? How can I improve these things and what have you? Which is I think a lot of fun around Christmas.
Well, a good opportunity for a reset.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I agree with you completely about, being able to refocus and re-energize and attack the new year.
Well, it's in some ways it's part of it's actually what I wanted to chat about today, which is like, it's almost like you have an operating system of like, okay, now is a good time to do those sort of like reflections and like, okay, how do we start the year, really with some like some velocity and some get some changes in quite quick and get some wins. And it sort of like links, to say, very well with what I want to chat about, because my philosophy is that I think that enrollment is actually more like an operating system than it is like a single process point within our thing. So I think, and I've said this and I wax lyrically about it, which is like, I think that enrollment is this like very sort of dynamic and very multi-factor system that is about moving patients through the entire clinical process. And I think that there's a lot of things that go into that, and I want to get into the modules almost, or the lenses that we can look in to those things and perhaps have a bit of a conversation about it. But effectively is that when we start to think about enrollment, there's a few pieces. There's the actual strategy, and then there's the operational delivery. And there's modules and lenses that we can look through all of these things, because the reality is that it's complex. It's not just about patients. It's about whether it's about the researchers, the sites, the healthcare systems, and everything else in between. So it's sort of like it crosses. It's more like a really complex Venn diagram, if you will, than anything else, because it sits very much as central as logistics and so on and so forth. So my thinking is that there's a few inherent challenges with it, and I think that the biggest challenge with enrollment is actually who owns it. Because when you start to think about, and it'd be good to get your thoughts on this before we jump into some of the sort of modular type things, is that I think part of the problem is that when we think about who owns enrollment, most of the time it's everyone. The PI is responsible, but so are recruitment companies. The CRO helps out, and ultimately then the sponsors pay for it when it slips. And it becomes like, I think we almost need to have this like single ownership of it that is responsible. And when I say like recruitment is part of enrollment. Recruitment for me is like a marketing piece around it. So I think that we should have a single dedicated function that is responsible for enrollment. But it'd be good to get your. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, a few that as it popped into my head, I was thinking that the ownership is really unclear.
Yeah.
So I would actually argue that sponsors have a significant role to play in ownership of enrollment. And I think enrollment just as like one piece on its own is hard to contain in that way because there's so many facets that impact it. Yeah. And so what I mean by that is that perhaps there's these areas of enrollment that different parties own. And so, for example, sponsors own the piece that defines all and impacts all the challenges that sites are going to face when they're trying to recruit and enroll participants. So they own that piece, and only they can impact that piece by how they've structured the protocol.
Absolutely.
So not to derail what you were...
Such a good point, because I always think of that piece, as you say, with the protocol, that determines not all, but a significant part of what the patient funnel looks like, right? In the sense of how fat is it going to be?
How big is that funnel going to be?
So you've got the sponsors that are like really responsible for that, because the sites, in a lot of ways, what they're trying to do is to operationalize that, and they can't work. They have to work within the confinements and the constraints of those entry criteria. Where they're going to lose patients is their operational excellence or lack of, because you're either losing patients through individuals that are suitable or otherwise suitable but are not being engaged with, or bad practice around communication. So we're not communicating effectively with patients, and therefore either not bringing them in, or patients are just simply not returning, or alternatively not converting once they come in. And then there's bad practice in terms of things around experience of the patient. So if, as we spoke about before, is that you get a patient with a bad experience, is like it reduces the chance or likelihood that they're gonna show up. So there's and it also can be just like simple things, right? A patient calls up for a particular clinical trial that they could be otherwise suitable for. It's written down on a note somewhere because a research nurse is ridiculously busy, and it's forgot about, and therefore that patient is just lost. But I think that the entry criteria is a bigger impact than the operational. I think that the operational is almost like a level 2 problem, which you're like stacking on top of that particular piece. So I totally agree with you. And I think there's also things that we should look at when those protocols, are being like, is how far wide can you cast your net and get feedback and thoughts around that? Because if your protocol is determining the entry criteria, you want to be damn sure that every single entry criteria is relevant and you understand the implications of each one and what that means from a delivery standpoint. So you can make an informed decision to say, I want to go ahead with this or not.
Hey everyone, Ted Trafford here. Innovating Clinical Trials isn't just a podcast, it's a conversation. And Liam and I want to hear from you. If you work for a sponsor or CRO and you've tried something new to overcome a recruitment challenge, whether it scaled beautifully or taught you hard lessons, we want to hear about it. Let's learn from each other and push this industry forward together. Find me on LinkedIn, Ted Trafford, and send me a message. That being said, on with the show. Sometimes when sponsors build the criteria, they don't maybe appreciate the nuance of how they've worded it on what is actually going to be in the medical records and what the reality is on the ground when sites start engaging candidates for a clinical trial. I often see
Absolutely.
really poorly worded eligibility criteria that won't really stand up to inspection when a regulator comes in, because if you were to follow that by the letter of the law, and just as an example, the documentation for the diagnosis of a condition. And if it is phrased poorly, then the site may be trying to search and obtain medical records for candidates that may or may not have that documented appropriately in those medical records. And you're relying on somebody outside the study to have made the correct diagnosis in the correct manner and to be able to document that. Whereas a few tweaks in how you word that criterion would really improve the ability to enroll that participant and clearly meet that criterion.
Absolutely. And that's one of the, that sort of like healthcare or standard of care is one of the lenses to look through, because you want to be understanding around how, as you say, how things are documented, about understanding about the healthcare pathways. So for instance, you have, there may be particular tests that are done in Canada or America that are completely different to the UK. And that then impacts, obviously, the speed or how you're going to search, find, and surface these patients. So you've got these like different, and the other thing as well to be mindful about with healthcare is that it's really diametrically opposed to research. So to the data point is that when you're looking for a particular, information and data, healthcare, because of the doctor's time, it's usually quite a high level, right? It's so that they've got asthma, or they've got this particular condition, right? And then not going to the level of detail that is often like reported from a research perspective. From a patient's perspective in healthcare, you're proactively going finding your doctor to tell them about a medical condition or a problem that you've got. Whereas in research, we are having to proactively try and reach out to patients. So it's a really interesting one because of these sort of like very diametrically opposed processes or operations. Then the other aspect of that is the individual. So that's another lens to look through, which is the people. Now, if you've got people that have effectively come up from a healthcare background and they're using essentially the same operating mentality as that they were doing in healthcare, again, it becomes difficult to do research, and it does take a while for those people to transition over from healthcare to research for obvious reasons, because they've been trained and in that way of thinking. So that's another aspect to it. There is things around, I think, another lens that I think is really important is things like behavioral science. So obviously one of the things that we will speak about quite a lot is that like how it's going to be perceived, the psychology of the people, and also trials. So like, what are the motivators, not only for patients, but for sites? What is important in the drivers then? Why one researcher, their motivators and drivers are very different from another. Like one may be extremely motivated by money. One may want to get involved in research, like, want to make a difference and so on and so forth. So I think that, again, it then becomes like, how do we, I think that once a lot of time is that we have the same, and I'll use the word sales patter for a site, irregardless of what their drivers and motivators are. And we do the exact same things for patients, and they'll have different drivers and motivators to be involved with research, right? So I think that then builds into the next lens, which is around, ultimately, how do you want people to feel? So this is like a hospitality lens, because we want to be in a position where research is relationships in a lot of ways, right? Is that it's actually the relationships that we're building with either the patients or the sites. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of these, these groups now that are like the site enablement teams, is like, how do we build those relationships? And I think there's a really fundamental question we should be asking ourselves before we're launching these trials, which is, what experience do we want to give these individuals that are working with us?
Yeah.
And I don't think it doesn't have to be ridiculously complex, but a complex solution. But I think it's a really important one, because in so many different industries, we'll ask that question, and yet our industry is probably, I don't really know huge amounts. Maybe the army, where you're volunteering your time in some capacity to take part in a research. Yeah, you may be getting paid if you're a site, or not if you're a patient. But I think that's a really important thing for us to do. And then we've also got other things like, the operations, and a lot of times it's about, from a delivery perspective, particularly as it comes to enrollment and the funnel, as we mentioned before, is that how do we understand those conversion points, and how do we plug the gaps to ensure that the conversions are as high as possible? So you do that, of course, by doing things like naming, like, okay, what are the things we're reporting on? Who are the people that are going to be responsible for those things? And how the frequency that we actually manage, is it on a daily or a weekly basis? Then there's other things, and I'm mindful of time, but like, obviously things like regs and quality give us guardrails. So what are some of those things that we need to be considering? And equity and access. So a good one I like for this is that, if you're looking at patients that are of working age to do your research, like, why are we always doing it 9 till 5? It's just, it's crazy to me. So yeah, there's some of the sort of like big modules for me that we need to be looking through.
Yeah, I completely agree. We need to have a much, much better understanding of what are all the steps along the way, and then who has ownership of each of those steps, and are they properly trained? Do they have all the resources that they need in order to optimize the processes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is great, Liam.
Yeah,
thanks so much for bringing up this topic today.
Yeah, we'll probably go into some details, I'm sure, about each of the modules. I think that might be a fun one to do. Cool.
Yeah, I've made some notes on things we need to dig into.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Cheers. Bye.